Thank you. Thank you very much, Ivan. Thank you all for this warm welcome. It's great to see you all here today. It's great to see so many of you. And I'm very happy we have time now to share some of our recent insights into the teaching of preschool children and young learners, primary children. And then later we'll be talking about the teaching of teenagers. I just need to make sure that I have everything I need for this presentation. So I have actually titled, as you can see, this presentation, Helping Preschool Children and Young Learners to Think in English. Now, of course, we don't always think in a language when we talk to somebody else. We do sometimes when we go for a walk on our own, or when we are having a shower, we have a tendency to have an inner monologue or dialogue going. We do occasionally all speak to ourselves, so to speak, but we don't always do that. Like when I'm engaged in a conversation, I don't have time to, at the same time, think in the language. We think in symbols, we think in images. So when we generally say you have to think in English, what we normally mean is don't think in your mother tongue, because that is going to be in the way. So I will go into that a little bit deeper then. This is what we're going to be looking at in this first session. I will be talking about what the famous Russian psychologist Lev Vygotsky used to call the development of cognitive tools. Secondly, we will have a quick look. So the cognitive tool development, that will be the main part of the session. Secondly, I will be talking about value-based teaching, because I think there is a link between these two, and there is also a link between cognitive tool development and creativity and the notion of ownership. But before we start this, I'd like to elaborate very briefly on what I think is a basic question that we have to ask ourselves as educators. As teachers of English, we are not just the ones who need to think about vocabulary and grammar and developing language skills. I think we are also educators at the same time. You know, teaching children is about education. So I think we need to make a principled decision on the educational route that we want to take with our young and very young learners. And in order to get our own thinking going on this, I'd like to briefly present a visual metaphor, if you like, a short video which is a metaphor of one possible route in education. Okay, it's not a video about teaching, it's a video about children, as you will see. It's very short. I'd just like to warn you, this might be a little bit noisy, okay? Be warned, okay? Here we go. Okay, the question is, do we want this? And what do I mean by this? Well, I mean, we've seen here a group of very young children, and very young children have a brain. And, you know, because of that, they are able to attend, they're able to think, they're able to remember things, but, and this is a key point, their cognitive system is very reactive. It's very reactive to the sensory environment that the child grows up in. So if we have children who are exposed to hours and hours and hours of fast-moving pictures, to a lot of noise, to fast-paced images, lots of movements on screens, colorful and constantly changing input, this has a certain influence on the development of their brains. And in fact, what we get is that if we have children who are used to this kind of sensory bombardment, if you have them in your language class, they will need a similar kind of bombardment so that you can actually grab their attention only for a short period of time. Are you with me? So we need a teacher who almost stands on her head out here in front of the class to even, you know, grab their attention for a few seconds. And if you only want to teach them a lexical set of 5 or 6 words, you have to put a lot of effort into this. Bodrova and Leong, in their book on Vygotsky's work, the book is titled Tools of the Mind, actually call this the attention-grabbing approach. It's not the kind of approach I personally would subscribe to. I have an alternative here. This, by the way, is the teacher in the attention-grabbing approach, okay? After the lesson, she is exhausted, right? Now, there is another possible route in education, and I would also like to play this very briefly. Okay, enough. I'm putting words into your mouths, obviously, when I say what we want, because I don't know, but what most educators want, I think, is children who are actually learning to direct their attention and to use their memory and problem-solving skills on their own. I think most teachers want children who gradually, and this is not a question of, you know, one approach or a set of certain activities, and from one moment to the next they will actually be able to take responsibility for their own learning. It's an approach that requires time and that requires patience and educational guidance from us. But I think most teachers want to aim at something like that. And we want children, mark my words here, who have the mental or the cognitive tools needed that help them to attend, remember, and think better. And this, again, is borrowed from Bodrova and Leong. They call learning as a self-directed activity. So let me go into this a little bit, this cognitive tool development. This young man here, as we can see, is doing a physical activity. He's trying to cut this board in half, okay? And of course, if we need to do something like that, we cannot do it with our extremities only. We cannot do it with using our hands only. We need a tool, you know. Otherwise, this would be impossible. If I were to drive a nail into this wooden board there, I would need a hammer. Without a hammer, it might be a pretty painful experience, actually. And this is a good metaphor, actually, of what cognitive tools are all about. Without physical tools, we'd be very limited in what we can do physically. Tools of the mind, or cognitive tools, extend our cognitive capabilities. Their absence will have very serious long-term consequences on the child's development. Without cognitive tools, children would not be able to actually do the most basic and later on more sophisticated cognitive activities. A very basic cognitive activity. I don't know where to stand without blocking your vision, so maybe I should be here. So they will not only not be able to pay attention, if somebody has not learned to pay attention, if a child has not learned that, then later on more sophisticated cognitive skills such as remembering, and that is important when learning a language, isn't it? Or engaging in abstract thinking, in critical thinking, etc., etc. That will be basically impossible. So this is another positive side effect. I'm not promising a holiday in the classroom, but children who are learning to develop their own cognitive tools will be more focused on their work, and that actually means that slightly reduces the workload for the teacher. You know, in the attention-grabbing approach, it is you who has to hold the kids like puppets on strings all the time. When students actually learn to use their cognitive capabilities, then we get far more personal involvement, engagement, and responsibility from our students. So this is the first aspect we're going to discuss and going to look at. But before we look at very concrete examples, can we talk for a moment about why should we teach thinking? Because it would be a justifiable question to say, well, hang on a minute, I mean, I have so many things to do, right? I need to teach my course book, and I need to work on my students' lexical development. I need to make sure they have enough of those chunks of language available, and I need to make sure that their language skills develop appropriately, that they learn to communicate, and I need to work on their pronunciation, and what have you. Why should I be teaching thinking on top of that, okay, of all things? Well, first of all, we don't really know what tomorrow's world will be like. Nobody knows that. We know for sure that tomorrow's world will be significantly different from today's. We know that the world is developing at an incredible pace, okay? And since we don't know what tomorrow's world will be like, our children, we cannot prepare them directly for a world where we don't know what it's going to be like. We can only develop as efficiently as possible their problem-solving skills, their decision-making skills, so that they are actually cognitively flexible enough to meet unexpected problems and tackle them. School, we have to say that in general, I'm not talking about your school. This is my second time in Taipei. I really cannot claim I know very well what your system is all about. But school in general, okay, the world over, is often based on the fallacy of an ideal of error-free learning. School is often focused on the assimilation of facts, and I'm not saying that knowledge and facts are not important, don't get me wrong. They are definitely important. When you think of language learning, we need to build up a solid lexical base, for example, and that is about knowledge. But we also, and this is what I would like to stress, we also need to learn that in real life out there, there is not always one right answer. In real life out there, as we know, we have to think of a plan B and a plan C and a plan D, and we cannot always just have one solution only in our mind. So the more flexible we are, cognitively speaking, the better. Marion Williams and I have developed in a book we wrote together a couple of years ago, Teaching Young Learners to Think. What we did was we were looking at, I mean, we are not the first ones talking about developing thinking skills. We, I think, were the first ones started talking about that as far as foreign language learning is concerned. There are a number of schools of thinking that aim at cognitive development, like hireless thinking maps and Feuerstein's instrumental enrichment program, etc., etc., etc. But they are all for general education and not for ELT. So what we have done is we have looked at these various approaches to developing thinking skills, and we have synthesized those into an approach for ELT, which required also partly the development of new, of certain new exercise types, of course. What we are saying is these are the, I believe, 13 categories of thinking, from very basic thinking skills over there on the left towards more sophisticated, and here we also have some real critical thinking skills that can be developed alongside the students' language skills in the ELT classroom. Because I'm not interested in giving the teacher an additional task that is not connected to language learning. I think we want to develop, if at all, we want to develop students' cognitive skills while we are developing their language skills. So these 13 categories are making comparisons, categorizing, sequencing, focusing attention, memorizing, exploring space, time and numbers, creating associations, understanding the relationship between cause and effect, and making decisions, a critical, a very sophisticated thinking skill. The interesting thing is that our sophisticated critical thinking skills are actually not completely different skills. They are a combination of basic thinking skills. I'd like to give you a very simple example. Let's imagine I want to buy myself a new laptop, okay? Well, you know, if you want to buy a new laptop, what you do is you go to a shop or you go online and you look at what is available. So I'm going into the shop and I can see, well, there's not one possible model that I might want to buy. There are actually several. So what do I need to do? I mean, unless I want to make a decision that I might regret later, if I just go by the color of the laptop or whatever, or what kind of fruit there is on the laptop. So I need to, first of all, I need to compare, don't I? So I'd be looking at this model over here. I'd be looking at RAM space and price, and I will lift it up to see how heavy it is, because I need it when I travel. I will look at the size. Will it fit into my traveling suitcase, and things like that. And then, of course, once I have you know, kind of like figured this out, I need to go over here, and then I need to look at this model over there. But if I have now forgotten what that one was all about, I'm in trouble. So I need to focus my attention. I need my memory skill. I need to compare. I need to categorize. And these are all basic thinking skills. I need to categorize. I say, before making a decision, I need to say, well, this one and this one and that one over here and that one, they are my four kind of like candidates. I need to make a decision now, etc. Do you see what I mean? So making a decision, which is a critical thinking skill, requires basic thinking skills, and they can be ideally developed in the young learner's classroom. Traditionally speaking, the English language class, especially when it comes to young learners, and especially when it comes to the early years of teaching, when the language level is still rather low, is not always an environment that facilitates thinking skills. Let me give you a few examples, if I may. Imagine a teacher is practicing prepositions, okay? Now, well, I don't have a bottle here, do I? Because I normally like doing this with a bottle. No, imagine this is a bottle, okay? You got one? Fantastic. Okay, so, thank you so much. imagine I want to practice prepositions, okay? So I say to my young learners, where's the bottle? And they say, it's on your head. And I say, where's the bottle? It's behind you. Where's the bottle? It's in front of you. Where's the bottle? It's next to you. Would you agree that this does not necessarily require a lot of thinking? Would you? Or I'm practicing the present progressive. What am I doing now? You are walking up and down. What am I doing now? You are sitting down, etc., etc. Or I want to practice colors in English. And I'm saying to my students, what color is my tie? Your tie is pink and blue. What color is my shirt? Your shirt is, it's a bit boring, it's pink too, isn't it? Now, you might say, well, hang on a minute. You said beginners' classrooms, you said very young learners. We do need to practice those questions and answers, don't we? Because students need to learn them. Well, what I'm trying to get across is, if we do not manage to, at the same time, challenge them cognitively, because none of these tasks that I have simulated now require any thinking, then because of the lack of cognitive involvement, what they're actually learning will not really be anchored in their brain for a long time. And that's the other point. Students are learning a kind of language use that is not very natural. Nobody, I travel the world, I've worked with teachers in 54 countries around the world. Nobody has ever said to me, how many fingers can you see? Or you can try it out. I mean, I don't speak your language, but if I spoke your language, imagine what would happen if I went out into the streets after these 2 seminars this morning, and the first person who comes up to me, I ask them in their language, excuse me, what color is my shirt? They would probably call the police or the ambulance, the fire brigade. And they would not say your shirt is pink. You are with me, aren't you? So, what I'm saying is, well, we need to be a little bit more creative. We, I mean also myself and people like me who develop language teaching materials, we need to be a little bit more creative to come up with activities, to come up with tasks that practice these simple, absolutely simple uses of language, and at the same time challenge the children's thinking, because if we manage to do that, then we are preparing them better for tomorrow's world, but we will also teach the language more efficiently. And I need to get rid of this bottle now. Let me just quickly, here it is, my remote control. Let me just give you a few examples here. This looks, doesn't it, like a very traditional worksheet, no? It says here, look at the picture of Tom. This is Tom. Right in front of him, behind him, on his right and on his left in the blanks, okay? Can I just ask you to call out very quickly the right answers, okay? So we have tower. Can you read this? Toy shop, park, and it says hotel here, okay? So let's get started. Please call it out very quickly. The tower is, thank you. The hotel is on his right. The shop is on his left, and the park is in front of him. Now, Tom turns right, finish the sentences. The tower is on his right, left. Okay. The hotel is on his in front of him. You are excellent. The shop is behind him, and the park is on his left. Do you see my point here? Of course, you are trained adult thinkers, but I swear, I've done this with teachers' groups, and actually some people said, left, right, left, right, left, right. Nobody in here, I must say. I tried to provoke you. But you can see that for a student, this is not that easy, because they actually, in order to be able to do that, have to do what is easy for us. They have to put themselves into Tom's shoes here. They actually have to imagine that he turns right, and then it's easy to answer the question. This becomes a little bit more challenging in the next stage of the development. What we're doing here is we're practicing prepositions. This is not very different from where is the bottle. We're practicing prepositions, but at the same time, we are actually working with our students to develop their sense for space. Children need a reference system to understand and control the space they live in. This includes a sense of position, distance, direction, proximity, and dimensions. So the basic cognitive skills we're practicing are these things, you know, next to these prepositions of space, as you know. But at the same time, when they think about Tom turning right and what sort of consequences that will have on his sense of space, on his orientation, they are actually imagining a change in a position. And that is necessary for the development of hypothetical thinking. If somebody works as a, biologist on a model of climate change, then they constantly have to ask hypothetical questions. What happens if the temperature of the seas rises by 1 or 1.5%? What does that mean in the system? What kind of consequences does that have on the various other aspects in the system? So this is necessary for hypothetical thinking. Sorry, a bullet point seems to have gone missing there. It also develops the ability to imagine another viewpoint. In other words, when children put themselves into Tom's shoes, they are learning a basic cognitive skill which is required in order to have empathy with somebody else. The skill of empathy, the ability to see the world through other people's eyes, the ability to sense what other people are sensing, that is an enormously important human quality. I mean, we know that this world is pretty much in a mess at the moment. And often it is because people do not have enough empathy with other people. So in a way, tasks like this also, a very modest contribution that we can make to world peace, you know. This is about, no, I'm not joking here, I'm not joking. This is about helping children to actually learn to be more human, to learn to put themselves in other people's shoes. Children who never learn that, who have not learned to look at the surroundings, at the world through other people's eyes, they will grow up being very egotistic. Okay? So this is what we are. I'd like to tell you a little anecdote here. Not too long ago, I was in Santiago de Chile in Latin America. And I was working with a group of teachers. I've worked with them several times from a very prestigious chain of schools. And their school in Santiago de Chile is where the ministers and the important people of the country sent their children to. So I was working with them on developing thinking skills. And during the coffee break, one of these teachers comes up to me, and she says to me, you know, we are all the teachers that are present here today. It was a group of I think 25, so small group. So we are all engaged in a community project because we are all working for free each of us gives 3 lessons a week to children from very, very socially underprivileged classes. There is school in neighborhood where we have children who come from very difficult social backgrounds. Their fathers sometimes in prison, and families where they have come across drug problems and violence and things like that. And we see it as our social obligation, because we're teaching all these high-flying kids. We see it as our social obligation to give that to the community. So we are working for free, 3 hours each of us a week with those kids. And she said to me, would you be prepared to give a lesson to them tomorrow? And I said, yes, of course, I'd love to. And she said, well, but I'd like to tell you, they are actually 14-year-olds. I said, okay, what's the problem? I said, well, there are going to be 160 kids in the class. Because normally there are 80 kids in the class, but we want to put 2 classes together. I said, all right. Breathing a bit. And then she said, they are kind of like, their language level is very low. Okay. And then she said, and we want you, I mean, the objective is that we would like you to make them aware of the importance of learning English. I became a bit quiet, to be honest. Okay, 160 14-year-olds from rather difficult social backgrounds, whose language level is very low, and I'm supposed to, I have 50 minutes to help them understand the importance of learning English. Okay, then I thought, well, I'd better do something about this. And I thought, I need to walk my talk. I am talking about the importance of developing thinking skills, and I cannot possibly give them a lecture on the importance of learning English. I cannot stand there and preach how important it is to learn English. So I thought, well, what I need to do is I need to get them to compare what it means to speak English as opposed to not being able to speak English, okay? So I started, I came into the class first of all next day, and I said, hi, do you speak English? And they said, no. And I said, no is English, good. And I said, ask me questions. And they did not immediately understand, so I put a question mark on the board, and I said, ask me questions. And somebody said, what's your name? And then they said, how old are you? And a few basic questions. And then I gave them this worksheet. I got them to work in pairs. I gave them this worksheet. And it's a simple worksheet that elaborates on same or different, okay? It's comparisons, basic thinking skills, developed actually for primary kids. This is from my book, Teaching Young Learners to Think. And so I explained to them, here they have to look at the size. Size is not the same word in Spanish, so I needed some help from one of the teachers. While the other categories here, like color is the same almost in Spanish. Age, they understood. And here we have shape. That's also something I need. Dirección is the same word. But shape also I needed help on, okay? To make that clear. So then I gave them 2 or 3 minutes, and they had to write here same or different, okay? And then I asked them, okay, let's compare what we have. Picture number 1, the size is lovely. Picture number 2, the size is different. The color is the same. Size, same. Age, probably different. The size, same. Color, different. Size, the same. Color, etc., etc., etc. Okay? Right. Then I said, imagine we have a girl here. How old is she? And they said, 16. The boys said, 16 immediately. Okay, I said, what's her name? And it was, I can't remember, Cecilia or something, okay? And I said, what does she look like? And they said, like, long hair, black hair, brown eyes, etc., etc., etc. And here we have a boy. How old is he? 16. What's his name? Carlos. Okay, okay, so we have Cecilia and Carlos. And I asked them to give me a description of Carlos. Then I said, what's the same about Cecilia and Carlos? And they said, they are from Chile. Okay. And what's different? Well, she's a girl, he's a boy. Okay. I said, well, Cecilia speaks Spanish and English. Carlos speaks Spanish only. What's different? And they said, she's a girl, he's a boy. I said, no, think. That's right, but think. I said, So we had this silence for a minute, okay? So what's different? And suddenly one of them goes, money! And I said, what do you mean money? And she says, Cecilia, speaking English and Spanish is good. Can work in hotel, is good money. Carlos, problem, not speak English, okay? It's good if speak English, something like that. And then another one said, and then I said, okay, what else is different? And they said, and then somebody else said, when go to other country, is good, speak English. And then somebody said, not when you go to Argentina. No problem, can speak Spanish, okay? So you know, my story finishes here. But you see what I mean? Rather than, you know, preaching to them how important it is, I actually got their thinking going. I got their comparison skills going and actually got them quite emotionally engaged. Some people say that KILL, content and language integrated learning, you know, combining content work also from other subjects like a bit of science, a bit of maths, a bit of geometry, a bit of I don't know, geography, what have you. In the language class, that is something where thinking is actually required because they explore general principles while learning the foreign language. And this goes hand in hand with something that Howard Gardner said a few years ago. If a student is to understand deeply, and that's what we want. We don't want students who just superficially run through their course books. We want them to go deeper and understand what they are involved in. He or she must immerse himself or herself in the subject matter, learning to think of it and approach it in a variety of ways. And the question, of course, always is, how do we do that with learners in the early stages of their language learning? Everything is easy when you're working with advanced students. Well, here is an example from a beginner's class, and you remember my What Color Is episode. Well, here the teacher has handed out, the teacher has taught colors. And now the teacher has handed out a blank CD-ROM to the students. And it's a sunny day like today out there. And they're standing by the window. They're moving the CD-ROM in the sunlight. And they're looking at the spectrum of light on the CD-ROM. And they are exploring what colors they see, and probably they will also come up with one color that the teacher hasn't taught, indigo, for example, because that's also part of the spectrum of light. So this would be an example of that, okay? This is an example that is a little bit more elaborate. This comes from my course book, Super Minds. Here what we have is students have just learned, they've read a short text about the importance of separating waste and the importance of recycling, for example, glass and paper, etc., etc., etc. And now what they have, they go to the appendix of the books and they have some stickers, and kids love stickers, don't they? They have stickers, and one sticker shows a pile of old newspapers, another sticker shows some old drink cans, some empty drink cans, another sticker shows some empty bottles, etc., etc., etc. Now they need to look at these bins here, and they have fruit and vegetables, glass, paper and card, metal, and they need to make a decision where to put the different waste items. So what they're doing is they are categorizing, they're selecting, and they're just sticking them onto the bins before they actually learn to verbalize it and finally do a kind of a recycling project in the classroom. So a simple activity like this is obviously good for the development of certain language aspects, but at the same time, they are using their comparison skills, they learn to categorize, they have to focus their attention, and finally they have to make a decision on where to stick those stickers. So it's quite elaborate in terms of the cognitive involvement of the students. Let me briefly talk about critical thinking. Critical thinking, as I said, is sophisticated thinking that is based on a number of those basic cognitive thinking skills. What does critical thinking actually mean? Well, first of all, it's about working out whether we can believe what we hear or see. For example, on television, or we read in the news, etc., 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 thinking critically whether something is true or not. Arguing one's case, being able to not just say I like it or I don't like it, but being able to say why I like something, elaborating on my own viewpoint. Identifying when we don't know enough is a very important aspect of critical thinking, okay? Knowing when you don't know enough, and then selecting information for a purpose. Where do I go to look for this information? The answer, of course, is always to the internet, but then it's also learning to differentiate, you know, between information that is useless and information that is helpful, etc., etc., etc. Now, of course, this kind of critical thinking development, that requires quite a bit of language also, and requires quite a bit of basic thinking skills in place already. So many people would say you can't do this at primary school. Well, you can if you have certain exercise types like this one. This is another example from our primary material, Superminds. What we have here, we have 3 different invitations to a birthday party. Reading comprehension. We're developing reading comprehension. Normally, we would then do questions and answers, or we would do a true-false, we would do a matching, and there's nothing wrong with that. We use them too in our books, of course, but occasionally, we use a different exercise type, like in this particular case. Read, think, and write what's missing in each birthday invitation. I'm going to read them out quickly because I'm not sure if you can see them up there well. Dear Ben, come to my birthday party on Sunday. Please ask your sister to come too. Can you also bring your football? I can't find mine. The birthday party is in our garden. See you on Sunday, Tim. B, dear Oliver, please come to my birthday party on Saturday. Can you please bring your running shoes? We'll have a race. Mom says don't bring your dog. Sorry, the party starts at 3 o'clock. See you on Saturday, Tara. And C, dear Linda, please come to my birthday party. Can you please bring your Purple Pumpkin CDs and your High Five CD? Please ask your brother to come too. Jamie wants to play football with him. The party is at my grandma's house, 16 Station Road. It starts at 4 o'clock. See you there, Emma. Okay. A, what's missing? The date. B, what's missing? The location. And C, what's missing here? The day, absolutely. The day is missing. If you don't know what day it is, it's difficult to go to the party, isn't it? So students are looking at this, they are thinking critically what is missing. And if students then are supposed to be writing their own invitation, we do remember them of the important elements, but they already know I have to put the date in, I have to put a place in, I have to put a time in, otherwise something is missing from the invitation. Okay? This would be another thinking task, which is on, it's about geometry, on patterns and symmetry. In one of the young learner exams, they need words like vertical and horizontal and diagonal. This is a good way of practicing these things. So first of all, they listen and they get a presentation of vertical stripes, diagonal stripes, horizontal stripes, a spiral, and some spots. Then they look at these pictures and they apply which patterns can you see. And here we have spots on the whale shark. Here we have spirals here. Yeah, this is an interesting one, isn't it? Because they look like diagonal, but they are not. It's just because the fish is swimming like this. They are actually horizontal. But this is good because that triggers off discussions in the classroom. And here we have vertical and horizontal, diagonal and spots again. Okay? And then we go on and they look at what is symmetrical and what is asymmetrical. And they draw a symmetrical fish. Very, very engaging. They love this kind of thing. Nice pictures. Lovely pictures, and at the same time they're learning important language and they're developing cognitive skills. I have another 10 minutes. The second point I briefly want to talk about is values. If you have somebody who is very smart, but they don't have their values in place, you have a gangster. Don't you? I mean, it's important to develop values at the same time, to explore values, to have values in place at the same time as being smart, okay? And of course, we know that when it comes to developing values, saying to a child, you have to, you must, don't do this, don't do that, doesn't often work very well. When you say, don't do this, the only thing they sometimes hear is, do this, okay? Or we create this in one ear and out the other effect, okay? So one way of getting students to think about values, to explore values, are good stories. And again, this can be done even at a pre-primary school, okay? So when children still think mythically, when they still think in stories, okay, you know, when you work with very young children and you're using a puppet, they know it's a puppet. And at the same time, as soon as the puppet starts talking, and it's of course you talking, they are totally enchanted. And it is as if the puppet was real and was alive, okay? So what are the brain's criteria for good story? Well, first of all, we need a simple structure, a beginning, a middle, and an end. We need some kind of problem that appears here, at the end of the beginning part, in the middle. Some kind of problem needs to occur. We need a bit of, magic, something that is different from reality, animals that can speak, for example. We need a strong emotional contrast. Happy versus sad, rich versus poor, greedy versus generous, because this is where the value exploration sort of springs out. And we need something unexpected that happens and that leads to a conflict resolution where the problem actually gets solved. I'd like to show you one little example here of a story that comes from our pre-school material called Super Safari, okay? And you will see there are these cartoon characters that you already saw in the beautiful Boogie Woogie today. There's Leo the lion, there's Gina the giraffe, there is Polly the parrot, and Mike the monkey. Here we go.
Carrot soup.
My favorite. I'm hungry.
Leo.
Oops. Sorry.
Sausages and chips.
My favorite. I'm hungry.
Apples.
My favorite. I'm hungry.
Cakes. And ice cream. Oh, my favorite. My favorite too.
Oh no, I'm too full. My favorite.
So what we have is we have important language. This can be practiced. Children can act out this little scene in a role play. And at the same time, this gets their thinking going. Because children have, of course, had this life experience of another child taking things away from them or not wanting to share, not being generous, etc., etc. So the polarity we have here, the emotional polarity is being happy or being sad. Or being disappointed. But the value that comes out is the importance of friendship, the importance of sharing with your friends. So that would be one example. Of course, when we have worked on the language, we can follow this up with, in this case, an activity. And again, this is for preschool, of course. This is from the same course book. Super Safari. This can be followed up with logical sequences. So here we have carrots, sausages, apples, cakes. Carrots, sausages, apples, cakes. The key thing is that rhythm and structural thinking somehow work together in our brain. So when you read this out rhythmically, you help your child to understand, to detect the patterns. So we have ice cream, chips, or fries, whatever you would say. Ice cream, chips. Ice cream, chips. Ice cream, okay? Now compare this to me saying cakes, chips, cakes, chips, cakes. Yeah, you know. But they will be confused, right? So rhythm and structural thinking goes hand in hand. Developing structural thinking is extremely important, for example, for later when you do some inductive grammar work. The kids who've learned to think structurally, who've learned to notice patterns, will have a clear advantage. Here would be another one from the same sort of theme, from the same unit. They make a food collage. You know, children, especially in big cities, often think that food comes from the supermarket. And here what they do is they work on you know how these things hang together. I mean, apples come from trees, and carrots come from the ground, and etc. And orange juice comes from oranges, etc. etc. So, you know, important language again, but at the same time, development of thinking skills. And this would be an activity which is a values activity. They watch certain scenes, certain situations. They're drawn here, and then they decide, you know, what is good behavior and what is bad behavior, because values are basically about doing things right or wrong. This is another story. We don't have the time to go into it, from primary material, which is also value-based. I'd like to say just a few words about creativity and ownership. Ownership, the concept of ownership, that is a concept that has recently been discussed a lot, you know. The good language learner takes ownership of the language they are learning. Learning a new language is not about learning 900 dialogues in your course books and then going out into the real world and reciting those 900 dialogues, okay? Good communicators are able to kiss those dialogues goodbye when necessary, and to use language creatively and to say things that they've never said before, to adapt to whatever is required in a certain situation. And this requires creativity. We say things we've never heard before. We need to do that. We need to learn that. Creativity is actually another important cognitive skill that can be trained from the very beginning. Creativity actually hangs together with our imagination. And creativity is about making images in our mind's eye. I'll give you a simple example. When you look around in this beautiful lecture theater, you know, all the things you can see here, from the beamer up there to the laptop I'm using, to the sound system and the furniture you're sitting on, all these things were once just a dream in someone's mind. All these things were once just imagination. And now they're here. But without that dream, without that imagination, you know, things would not have come into existence. And that is the key thing. James Sull, who I will briefly mention in my next session, he's one of the world's leading experts on learning and the human brain, a leading neurobiologist of the world. He says, creativity is one of the valued aspects of the mature mind, and images often are the stuff of creativity. So no creativity in most cases without images, right? We conceive a new image and suddenly it leads in directions we have not imagined before. We can do little activities in the language class, you know. Children they often need to learn also to focus their attention. Many kids are a bit restless sometimes. Their attention span is not always extremely long. An activity like this one is good for that. It's good to help kids to focus their attention, but it's also good to develop their creativity. Okay, so it says here, listen and imagine, then draw your picture. This is at the end of a unit so that children already have the language they need in order to be able to then talk about their imagination. Let me just play this to you.
Close your eyes. Imagine a robot. A beautiful robot pet. Here's the head. And here are the ears. Here's the right arm and the left leg. Here's the left arm, and here's the right leg. Now draw your robot pet.
In the unit, just to give you an idea, there was a story where kids assemble a robot, okay? So now the creativity task here is about putting a robot pet together, and there is a short, brief model text here, and children then write their own text or talk about their imagination, talk about their robot pets. Okay, well, this is the end of the first session. I hope you've found at least some of these things useful. You've got some ideas here for your own language class. Please have a look at the materials also out there. I've used examples from 2 course books, as I have mentioned them. Super Safari for preschool children and Super Minds for primary children. Both do not only aim at, but really do develop thinking skills, values, and also creativity, while developing language skills at the same time. Well, I'd just like to say thank you very much.